So I want to thank everyone for coming tonight as we meet the folks from the Patient Caregiver Artist Coalition. And we're going to have four presenters tonight. And we're going to have Torrance York, Alicia Vera, Sara Winston, and Jordan and Anna Rathkopf. And we're going to start with Jordan, who's going to give us a quick overview of this new entity, this new group of photographers and what they're doing and how they're doing it. So, Jordan, it's all yours.
Thanks so much, Frank. And hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. So, my wife and I, Anna,
Hey.
8 years ago, Anna was diagnosed with breast cancer when she was 37. And as you can imagine, it really changed the trajectory of our lives. And one of the issues I think we faced early on was just feeling isolated, feeling misunderstood, and not seeing our experience represented in what we were seeing in the world in terms of visual representation. And so we started documenting our own journey, and what we found along the way was that there were a lot of other people that feel that way too. And we released a book last year, and we decided to take that as an opportunity to also really launch what was our bigger dream, was this nonprofit called the Patient Caregiver Artist Coalition. And the mission of the organization is really to bring artists together with lived experience across different illness and different care situations, uh, to essentially work as connectors, connecting communities of people that often don't connect with each other that really should. Healthcare providers, pharmaceutical reps, patients, caregivers, students. How can we bring all these people who obviously are connected to these issues together? I think that art is one of the greatest tools for that reason, and that's really what inspired us to create this nonprofit. Uh, it's inclusive. It's open to all. If there's people on this call or who will be watching the recording of this who want to get involved, who want to have their stories maybe featured, or want to do other things to help create opportunities and platforms for arts around lived experience of illness, please reach out to me directly. This is meant to be a community built by the community for the community.
So, Jordan, other photographers or illustrators or writers can contact you to join the coalition.
Absolutely. Or even I have board members who work in palliative care at Duke Health. I mean, you don't have to just be an artist. I mean,
Right. Okay.
I think the connecting tissue here is that you believe in the healing power of art and the power of art for activism to actually affect change and to help raise conversations that need to be had about how we can better support people who are experiencing illness and care.
And so folks who would join, depending upon what their vision is as it relates to, I'd like to join this so that I can gain this exposure to get work from this. So that are you reaching out to the pharmaceuticals, to the healthcare industry to let them know that you exist? So if they're looking for artists to do projects for their hospital or for their patients, this becomes a reservoir of talent.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm essentially because of our own story, which has been in the news in the last year, we're in a lot of conversations. Unfortunately, cancer under 50 is a topic that has been brought up a lot in this last year, and we are kind of, for better and worse, very much in that community. So a lot of people have been interested to talk to us.
Okay.
And in talking to them, what I'm trying to do is also point them to other people from other areas of disease, from other issues, so that we can make sure that the people who are making the editorial stories, the marketing campaigns, or even just bedside manner and talks at hospitals, I want to make sure that we're giving a seat at the table to people who have really lived it. And that's really instrumental. And so as I'm in these conversations and exploring these partnerships, I really I want to spread the love. I want to have a community that can collaborate together to do things that alone we couldn't do.
Okay, great. So the best way is to go to the website, send you an email, and you get back to them.
Absolutely. Or a message here, whatever, however you'd like.
Okay. Yes. So make sure you put, your email and your website, in the chat room so anyone can pick that up and have that information.
Great. And the people today are people that inspired me, people whose work I've seen in one form or another, either in major news or beautiful books or beautiful exhibitions. And across different diseases from MS to Parkinson's to Alzheimer's, our story being cancer. I think the one thing that's important to us is that um, everyone's experience with illness is different. Everyone's illness can be different and how we experience it. But I do feel a really strong feeling of solidarity and connection with anyone who's gone through something as difficult as a serious disease,
Mm,
or been around a loved one who has.
okay. And is part of the organization, is there sort of a mentorship where you can help somebody as far as that person, that photographer, that writer, to guide them in their careers? Is that a piece of this as well?
That's what I'm trying to build. I mean, I would love funding for that. That's what one of the things I want to get some funding for is so that we can, essentially, I'd like to have like a publicity division where essentially if you have a project that's in development, but maybe not the bandwidth to promote it yourself or the know-how, my team could step in and really help guide that. My background, Frank, as you may remember, was in PR and marketing. I
Right.
used to work with celebrities and influencers, so I have a good instinct for publicity, and I would love to help other people with that. But as we grow this and build this, yeah, I would love it to be maybe Sarah has someone else who's working on a similar topic or a way of experience exploring, or Torrance or Alicia, and kind of this network of people who can really help support each other, peer support, essentially.
Okay. Okay. Great. So, can we get started, Jordan, or is there any other
So,
points you want to make?
nope, let's do it.
Okay. So again, and now we have more people coming in. So I want to thank everyone for coming in. I want to thank Epson, Photo Shelter, Pro Photo Daily, American Photography, and BH who support us. I do ask, especially all the folks who are new, if you could subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is I'm sure Jay will put in the chat room. And with that, let's get started with Alicia Vera, who is actually in Mexico City presenting tonight. So off we go. Alicia, you control the screen, and here we go.
Cool. Hi, everyone. Um, one second. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just gonna put like a little intro screen and then I'll switch screens and go through my book, which I felt like was the best way to show the work that I'm doing because it's photo based, but also there's like text messages and drawings and handwritten notes and all sorts of things that go into this project. So I felt like that was probably the best way to show the work. So hi, I'm Alicia. I'm based in Mexico City. My project, or the project that I'm showing today, it's called Va a llover toda la noche. In English, it's translated to It's Going to Rain All Night. And this work began when my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2018. Uh, as you can imagine, I felt completely overwhelmed and helpless, and I just had all the feelings. And so I knew that I needed to do something, I guess, artistic or something that I could express my emotions through. And just a little bit of background, I started in the world of like photojournalism, documentary photography. And initially, that was the route that I was gonna go to do this work, but it just didn't feel quite right to me, and it didn't feel quite, I guess, honest to me because it's just so multi-layered, so many different emotions. I also felt like, a lot of the work that I had seen on Alzheimer's dementia tends to focus on sort of like the focuses on the patient, which first of all, I mean, I think obviously it's like really important to show that like lived experience, but I felt like there was a lack of dignity in a lot of the images that I was seeing. Like I was seeing a lot of the same pictures, and a lot was like, the patient in the hospital, the patient can't walk anymore, the patient being fed, the patient who fell on the floor. And I was like, I'm not trying to show my mother in this light. It just didn't feel right to me. And knowing who my mom was, just like as a human, she's somebody who always really cared about the way people perceived her. So I didn't want to just go in there and like, shove my camera in her face. And obviously I would have done it very delicately, but it just didn't feel quite right to me. And the other thing is that I also felt that my experience as a daughter, and I guess part-time caregiver, that this experience was lacking from a lot of the visual stories that I was seeing. And so, I mean, I'll get to the book, which I just published. So I'm going to show the PDF, and I think you guys are seeing this, right? It's a text message. Just to
Not yet. We
Okay.
still have.
Cool. So throughout the project or throughout the years, I guess after 2018, I started collecting a lot of different things. Not totally sure what I was going to do with this work just yet, but again, as a documentary photographer, I just became like really obsessive about collecting things, right? And so part of that were like text messages that I was receiving from my family members. And so this is one that I received from
Uh,
my dad.
Alicia, we still only see that cover shot. We don't see anything else.
Oh, let me stop sharing and then I'll reshare. Let me see.
Okay. Okay, there you go.
Okay, cool. Oh,
Okay.
so yeah, this is a text message from my dad. And again, I was just saving all of these and just like starring them all on my WhatsApp and screenshotting them because I just felt like this was, and this for example like made the first page of the book because I wanted you to feel like that really heavy impact that I felt when I was receiving these messages.
Okay.
Uh, and this, for example, I mean, I don't want to go like super detailed about every single image, but again, there was like this like documentary or photojournalistic capturing my mother in that way just didn't feel quite right to me. Like I would take this picture and then it just felt too, I don't know how to explain, like too clean, like too pretty, too, I don't know. And for me, it felt like, yeah, but my mom is fading. Like this picture just isn't captured enough. And so part of my process was going through archival images, and actually thankfully my dad had given me like a bunch of boxes of super 8 film, like the transparencies, I'm blanking on what they're called, just like archival images that I began to scan, and then I started kind of overlaying them and doing these like double exposures. And at some point I was like playing with bleach, and I felt like this also spoke to kind of like the fading of my mother's memories. um, and so I felt like just playing around with these textures for me really helped capture sort of like the emotions that I was feeling, and like this idea of like memory and loss. And so yeah, so my again, it was just like me experimenting with a lot of this techniques to try to capture a feeling more than anything. I included these in the book, which I also was not sure what I was going to do. One of the things that my father had me do was every time so I live in Mexico City, but my parents live in Miami. And every time I would fly home to Miami, my father would tell me to please organize my mother's room because as my mom, her disease progressed, she became a little bit of a hoarder. Uh, and so she had like a mess in her room. Like you could barely even walk through her room. And I remember begging my dad, like, I will clean it, I will take care of everything. And because I was like afraid that he would throw things away. And one of the things that I kept were like these notebooks. And I found a lot of scribbling that my mom would do. And I again didn't know what I was going to do with it. I kept it. It wasn't until the book that I was like, oh my God, for me, it almost feels like it conceptually captures like what's going on in her brain. Like it's almost
Mm.
like I don't know.
And Alicia, I mean, as you're doing this, are you able to separate yourself as a documentarian and as a daughter? Like, how does that work for you?
The answer is no. I mean, it's really heavy for me to. It's like on one hand, I go in there and I collect these things, and I almost force myself to go on autopilot because I'm like, one day I'm going to do something with this, right? And I would just like throw it in my suitcase. And then I would come home to Mexico City and take everything out, and I would just sit there and cry. And I would sit there and like communicate with my mom through pictures or through her writings or through, the archival images. So I guess in a way, when I was in Florida, I was able to separate myself a little bit because I also had to compartmentalize a lot of my emotions because my mom, even though, now she's pretty advanced, she still knows when something's wrong with me. Like she can pick up when I'm feeling sad. And so I
Mm.
try to like compartmentalize my feelings and not really, I don't want her to be worried about me.
You,
So
you know what's sort of interesting is listening to you. It's all and we I think people who take care of people who get sick, you start to go into a different role. Like now you're keeping your mother's artwork the way I would keep my son's artwork. I don't want to throw it out. It's special. It's this, it's this, it's that. And now you're doing the same thing with your mom,
oh, absolutely.
right?
And
I
I
mean, it's
think
sort of interesting.
it is for me, it is really interesting because I had a really tumultuous relationship with my mom growing up. I was like the rebel of the family. I grew up in the US, my mom grew up in Mexico City. And I felt even though my mom and I clashed a lot, and there was a lot of things that I don't think were right about the way my mom parented me, but my mom always loved me and took care of me and held me and like she just always really loved me, even though sometimes, parents don't love sometimes in the best way. And now I feel very protective over my mom. I feel
Mhm.
like I'm the only daughter and I am, with my two brothers and my father, and I'm always the person who's like advocating for her and trying to be there for her. So I can 100% see now that I like our roles have reversed. So it's a really tricky and complicated situation.
And
Um,
did she write the word music in that scribble that she had?
She did because she would
Right.
take random notes. I would find really weird things. Like, I think she would be like watching TV and she would write something down, or she was like reading a book and she would try to take notes. There's another picture where you'll see eventually where she was also like obsessively writing the family tree over and over and over
Mm.
again. And I think, I mean, my theory, obviously, I can't ask my mom, but like my theory is that my mom was trying to use her brain. Like she knew something was happening to her, even though to us, to the family, she was always in denial. She was like, I don't need to go to a doctor. I'm totally fine. I'm just old. This is normal. But
Mm.
going through a lot of these notes, I'm realizing that like she knew something was wrong. And I think in her alone time, there was a reason why she would write, her kids' names, her husband, my father, like her husband's name, the day they were married, our birthdays over and over and over again. I also found like a recipe to a lemon pie and I have like 20 copies of it. So it's I
Ah.
don't know, all of these things to me are like, in that moment didn't mean that much to me, but now a couple years later, I'm like, oh my God, all of this to me at least is making sense. Um, but
So let me ask you this, and I guess this will be a question I ask everyone. Could you do this? Could you do this documentarian work with someone that you don't know? And how would you do it? But keep advancing the images so we move
sure.
along.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, now I understand sort of like the empathy and the care and the patience that it takes to photograph or document somebody in this way. I don't want to repeat images again that like lack dignity. For me, that's like first and foremost. So I think I would approach somebody else's I don't know, family in a similar way. I also do like these elements of ephemera. And so I think that could be also an interesting component to like document somebody else. So at least I think that's what this has taught me. So and
Yeah, I
again,
mean, one of the gifts that all of you artists, because we'll have photographers tonight, really have to be able to do is to convey all of this, all these wonderful feelings to a perfect stranger and their family, right? This is the way I would do it. I mean, that takes that's a real gift, away from the photography piece, to be able to convey that to a family who says, should we allow this person to do it, to document this journey, and will she have the sensitivity to give justice to my mom, my dad,
And
right?
I
You really
think
have.
bringing in like different conceptual elements for me has been really just powerful and interesting. And I mean, because again, because I grew into or I worked in the photojournalism world, we're often told that like an image is the truth. And I don't really believe that anymore. I feel like humans are so complex and multifaceted that it is important also to think about different elements that could share their stories, right?
Mhm. Okay.
So I did end up using a lot of like more traditional documentary style. And this was eventually it all made sense together because when I first started working on this, I was like, how am I going to piece together a drawing with a documentary style image? But putting it all together for me now kind of makes sense. Like here, for example, my mom worked in a school. She was a teacher's assistant. And there's something to
Uh-huh.
me, like I was trying to get to know my mom basically through a lot of this work as well, because again, my mom and I clashed a lot as a teenager. Uh, and it wasn't until I moved out of Miami, I went to San Francisco and eventually to Mexico City. And we had this distance that I was finally getting to know my mom in a way where I was like, oh, she's actually a whole human. And she's not just like my mom, like she has like hopes and dreams. And so finding things like this, like, her school pictures, I really loved
These are
to
great.
show too, because I'm like, how does she want to present herself to the world, right? What does she
Mhm.
wear?
What was her name? Or what is her name?
Concepcion. Concepcion.
Concepcion.
They call her Connie. So
Funny.
I'm not sure what happened here in the middle with that PDF thing happening, so just ignore that in some of the images.
Okay.
But again, these are also kind of more traditional documentary-ish style photos. And one of the things I also try to capture was just like, my parents live in the suburbs, and I feel like the suburbs can be extremely boring. So I was like trying to capture it in this way where it captured a mood more than anything, like me just being really sad. So a lot of these images are pretty moody. I also included some journal entries of mine in the book where I know my handwriting's like chicken scratch, but I included a lot of this in there because I felt like, again, there was like a conversation happening between me and my mom. Like I felt like I'm her only daughter. I feel like there's a lot of generational trauma in there, like themes of generational trauma in there as well. There's something about having her handwriting and my handwriting to me that speaks to each other. And because, yes, the project is about my mom, at the end of the day, I think it's more about me and my family and how I'm coping
Mm.
with the disease. So I wanted to include that in there. Um, this, for example, was also like a little bit more experimentation. When my mom came to visit me in Mexico City, I think 2018, 2019, we took her to a neuropsychologist who did a bunch of tests. And the dots are from like a graph that they gave us, which tested like her math skills, her memory skills, her communication skills. And there was something about these dots that I thought were really interesting and wanted to incorporate them in the project. And again, the dots, the blank spaces also to me like blank in gaps in memory. And I was also playing around, again, archival. This is her on the left, and the image on the right is one that I took through my travels through Mexico. And there's something about, again, me living in Mexico, traveling through Mexico, finding images of my mom in Mexico that to me like spoke to each other and almost for me was like really healing because I felt like again almost like I'm healing myself through being in Mexico but also through like this work of us communicating with each other.
Mm.
Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold too. So again, this is like a photograph of my mom when she was a kid here in Mexico, actually. And She said it was a really beautiful picture, and I wanted to include um, just like a photo of her in her childhood because I felt like, again, a lot of the images that I see lack a lot of humanity. And so I wanted to just kind of show her when she was in her youth. And then also, um, yeah, that obsession of like writing the family tree over and over and over again. So again, this is in my home, and I also realized that one of the things that I was doing a lot was taking the same photograph over and over and over again, which again, like it's interesting to see now because I think subconsciously or consciously, I don't know, like I knew everything was going to change one day, right? And so it was like this obsession with my mom looking out the window. So I
Yeah.
have like multiple images in here. Again, also,
So, Alicia, how therapeutic is this for you? Can you take a step back and realize, like now, I'm sort of making peace with my mom as you're doing this discovery?
mm, I don't know if I'm making peace with it. I'm still very much knee deep in the middle of all of this.
Mm,
And I actually don't feel like I'm ever gonna finish with this project. Like, sure, I had, a nice exhibition and I published this book, but I have a lot of feelings and a lot of things to say about so many different things.
mm,
Um, but no, as far as therapeutic, it's been really, really cathartic.
mm,
Um, because I feel helpless most of the time. I feel like I don't know what to do. And especially, living in Mexico City and my mom's in Florida, like, I can give my opinion. I can go to Miami. I can help out as much as possible. But at the end of the day, like, I'm here far away and I'm
mm,
anxious and worried. And so there's something about, um, touching archival images, playing with things, putting things together that has been really, really helpful for me. And another thing that I would say is that a lot of like the kind of more traditional doc style images, I think has helped me be present with my mom in a way that I might not have been.
mm,
Uh, because you can't be on your phone and on your camera at the same time, right? You have to like be present and be holding your camera and talk to that person. And especially with somebody with dementia, I think my mom and I would often like collaborate on some portraits. Like I would have her, stand somewhere where there was like some beautiful light, and my mom would make these like really goofy faces until I got like the image that I wanted. And that was really, really beautiful and healing to me because you know, I feel like a lot of us we're just on our phones all the time and we're not present with our family members. We're constantly distracted. And to spend these moments with my mom, uh, and also again having her collaborate with me on certain images just felt really healing and beautiful and my mom's actually in an assisted living home as of a week ago. And I realize how special all of those moments with us were because I don't think that she's going to be able to collaborate with me in the same way that she was able to for the past couple years. So, yeah.
mm.
Um, yeah. This
Oh,
is sorry, it's a little bit emotional because it's so fresh also. Um, but yeah, again, these are like text messages that I was getting from my family members, which I felt again like were really, really important to put into the project because they were just like really disorienting text messages, especially for somebody who lives in another country, So the only way I can communicate with my family is really through texts and phone calls. And so to get these messages, it was like really jarring for me.
mm. Yeah, it's also sort of interesting how your family is texting you these messages, and are they making it a little softer than the day in and day out? of being a caregiver is always a very intense space to be, but you're far away and now they're giving you these messages and it's wrenching for you, right? That's a piece of it as well.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, it's been interesting because I mean, with my brothers, it's a little bit complicated, but I always felt like, as the woman, the daughter, right? Like, I guess it's ingrained in me to be more of a caretaker than them. So somehow, as I'm in another country, I still felt, I mean, things are a little bit different as of a week ago, but I still felt like I was the person who was helping out the most out of everybody's. And so sometimes when I would receive these messages, for me, it was like, yeah, but you're there. You're physically there. Take care of things, you know?
But that's an interesting thing. Like, why do women fall into that role more than men?
I'm in the
That
patriarchy.
Yeah, right. I mean that's not fair, right? On a lot of levels.
No,
Um,
I mean, yeah,
okay.
yeah, and fortunately, I don't even know how to frame it, but my father has fallen to the main caregiver,
Oh.
and that's been really, really interesting, because my father is not a caregiver. Like it was always my mom. My mom was the person who did everything for us. My dad was working, he would come home and he would go to bed, or he would eat dinner and then go to bed. It was never an innate thing for him. And so uh, to see him forced into this role has been really challenging for me. And I actually, there's a second part to this project, which I won't show today because of lack of time, but I did make a second part of the project that was inspired by my father, because even though it's not like an thing for him, and even though he struggles with it, he still like suffers from depression,
Mm.
and also feels like his life has been taken away from him. And so I started like a second part of the project, which in the book, they're like these little inserts that go in between like a lot of the pages. Um, I won't talk about it too much because I'm not showing those images. But
Okay.
yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
Okay. Um,
I'm not sure how much time I have, so I'm just,
yeah, just zip through the last few because you're already at that time because we want to get
oh shit,
everybody
okay.
in.
Let me keep going. Again, a lot of collaborations with my mom. I would throw her into some nice light and just,
Right.
something similar. I also took like I found Super 8 film, which was really, really special to see my parents in color. And so a lot of
Mm.
those screenshots made it into uh, the the book as well. Sorry, I'm gonna go
Your
through.
mom's so beautiful.
Oh, my mom is stunning. She is stunning. Quickly about this, I also was obsessively taking screenshots every single time that we would FaceTime, because my mom would call me 5 times a day. And at some point I'm human, right? So I'd be like, oh my gosh, she's calling me again, right? But I would
Mm.
also always try to pick up the phone, and I would always record it again, because obsessively documenting things. But I also knew inside of me, one day she's gonna stop calling me. And she did.
Yeah.
And that was really, really heartbreaking for me. And so I put that in there. These are also some more scribbles, more screen time. I put that last image as kind of like I tried calling her and now she doesn't even pick up the phone. And my mom basically stopped. She doesn't know how to use the phone anymore. So
Mm.
look how beautiful she is,
My God.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'll zip through. I think that's the last image. And just a quick note on the title. It's Va a llover toda la noche because my mom used to leave notes on my door every time I would go home, like really random things. And this one, this is like a scan of the original note, which is actually the cover of the book. Um, and she left it on my door because she wanted to tell me that it was going to rain all night, which I thought was just completely random. I was like, okay, I guess. Thanks, mom. Like I could have looked at the weather app, but I kept the note. And again, when I was like in Mexico sorting through all the things that I had, I was like, it is gonna rain all night. Like it just clicked and it made sense for me. And it just felt like a very metaphorical thing for like what was happening. And so that's why the title. So okay, I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, that's all. I mean, it's yeah, it's quite a journey being the caregiver and the daughter and all the things that just growing up comes flashing back. We did it for a short time with my mom, and it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. So that's really beautiful. So hopefully you could stick around for questions later. But next up is Sara Winston. So Sara, it's all yours. Thank you so much, Alicia.
Thanks, Frank. Thank you, Alicia. That was really beautiful. Don't want to just move forward without saying so. And want to say thanks also to Anna and Jordan Rathkopf for bringing me into the Patient Artist Caregiver Coalition. Still working. Please unmute and please correct me. I'm nervous and I mixed up the order.
Doesn't matter. You're doing
That's
fine.
fine. Don't worry.
And thank you. I just also 1 second. Alicia, thank you so much.
Thank
I
you,
know
Alicia.
you're having a really tough week, and your work is a beautiful, just emotional, and thank you so much. And Sara, back to you, who I'm also in love with your work.
Me
Thank
so.
you. Thank you guys.
Patient Caregiver Artist Coalition. Thanks, got it that time. And also want to say hi to my friends, Ruth and Robert out there who are joining from just up the road. So I'm gonna share my work with you tonight, and let's see how I can do with the technology.
There you go.
So, about 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with MS when I was 25. I didn't know much about multiple sclerosis. I have two relatives who have been disabled with MS most of my life. But generally, I didn't know anything about the disease beyond seeing what these two aunts in my life, seeing them once every 4 or 5 years, and what I understood about the disease from portrayals of it in popular culture, on TV shows, how it's described in 2 sentences in magazines and things like that. So after my diagnosis, I was, as has been mentioned by other people in this presentation tonight, feeling really isolated and alone and afraid because I only knew one narrative of the disease, which is that you find out you have it, and then before too long, you can't speak, you can't walk, you can't see. And so I really didn't know what to expect. And I was living in Detroit, Michigan, and I'm originally from the Hudson Valley region of New York, which is where I am now. And shortly after my diagnosis, I had a disease flare where I woke up in the morning and I couldn't see. And once I started to get my vision back over the course of a few weeks, it was very dramatically doubled. So I had double vision for about 6 weeks or so. And during that time, I kept thinking that I really needed to find artists, photographers, writers who shared this experience so that I could begin to understand in some capacity how artists reflect on this sort of unknown. And in that search, in those initial weeks and months, I learned about Lucia Perillo, who was a naturalist who lived on the west coast of the United States. And she had MS, and as she became more and more disabled and a wheelchair user, she wrote this book called I've Heard the Vultures Singing, Field Notes on Poetry, Illness, and Nature. And this sentence in particular really resonates with me still. We assume the common things will always be here, so we tell ourselves we'll deal with them another day. And I think I don't need to really over explain that. It's just sort of this assumption that all there is time. And especially when you're young, there's this understanding that there's time and opportunity, and uh, there's never going to be a lack of that. So I I primarily make pictures, and I'm always thinking about how those pictures will work in the book form. And so in 2015, I had the opportunity to make my first book published with a publisher. I had been self-publishing books before that. And I'm just going to share a flip through of this book at a pretty fast pace. So all of these pictures were made using my digital camera in the period after my diagnosis, where I had double vision, and I was using my camera for the very first time with its autofocus functions. And I had been educated as a photographer in art school. Use the manual functions always. You control every aspect of what you see and what you show. And so I felt this freedom all of a sudden because I was using the autofocus on my camera, and it was an assistive device. I was using it so that I could look on that screen and see what was in front of my face. Beyond my arm's length, everything would really double, and the further away things were, the more side by side and the space between the double images would be. So these photographs were the documentation of my process of moving from Michigan back into my parents' house in upstate New York, about 50 miles north of Manhattan. And there's a precursor here of the next book that comes after this one in 2017, where my father and I were dealing with illnesses alongside each other, his having more to do with his age and his weight than mine, which had to do with an unknown number of causes. Because they don't really know what causes MS in someone. It's believed to be a mix of genetic factors and environmental factors as well. So I released this book in 2015, and after that, I moved back to New York. This is always the tricky part. And I made a series of pictures at my parents' house, where I lived for about 13 months. So that I could, wait for my eyes to correct themselves, and figure out how to start my life again at 26.
And Sarah, how are you dealing with the mental stress of this, of the not knowing?
Uh, that's
I'll
a
take
really
it
good
back.
question. I think I'm still dealing with it, but the truth is that this was the big kick in my life, that I didn't know what the illness, how it was going to present or when it
Mm.
was going to present. But the truth is, all we have are unknowns. We have very few knowns. And so I've started to think more about what I could control.
Mm.
And yes.
Yeah. And before this happened, were you a spiritual person? Like you sound very much in that space now, where you're thinking about the world and how you fit in all those different things. Did you have that vision of the world that way, or did the disease and the circumstances push you there quicker or deeper?
The circumstances of my illness definitely pushed me there quicker.
Yeah.
Um, Made me focus a lot more on what I want to achieve, I think. So I made a series of pictures in the 13 months that I was living back in my childhood home with the person who would become my husband. And I continued to make these photographs, all vertical, all color, really thinking about objects and occasionally introducing portraits of the people who were in my home with me. And in the book, it was released in a small edition of 50 copies, but later this summer, we're making a second edition of it that will be published with the LA-based publisher For the Birds Trapped in Airports. So it will be available again because we sold the 50 copies rather quickly. I wrote about why it was surprising to me when I was diagnosed with MS because it felt like I was following all the rules of what one has to do to have a healthy body. And then my dad, who's pictured here, he also wrote a piece in several short prosaic entries that appear in the book about what it's like to be a parent who has a sick child.
Mm.
So during this period, 2015, I moved back to New York and I start to receive medical infusions every 28 days. Now, here's a point in the presentation where there's a lot of IVs and a little bit of blood. So if you need to excuse yourself, I just want to give you the opportunity to do that. I was dealing with this diagnosis, really only speaking to about 3 people about it, my parents and my husband. And I didn't know how to explain this to anyone because I hardly knew what it meant myself. And I didn't know what to expect in terms of physical disability. It was about a few weeks after my diagnosis that I couldn't see, and I didn't know how to talk about that with anyone. So I really turned inward and became much more private about the whole experience. And
And
yes.
no, I was wondering, going through this illness and your dad being sick, what did that do for for your relationship with him?
Working on the book together and including his writing in the book, that act of collaboration allowed us to see each other and be a part of each other's lives in that moment in a way we wouldn't have been able to
Right.
otherwise. Because he wanted to be the strong one.
Yeah, well, that's what a dad does, right?
Um, so I started receiving these medical infusions, and it was pretty shocking to me. And I didn't, I wasn't telling anyone in my life, none of my friends about it. And so I just started to think about this photographically. And I was, for the most part, just using my iPhone and um, thinking about color and form and geometry. Uh, and just letting the dialogue my brain would have with the pictures afterward sort of carry me through. Um, and I did this for 5 years. I made these pictures every 28 days for 5 years. And maybe in the third year, I started sharing them on Instagram. Because there's an artist who I admire named Carolyn Lazard who has this project called In Sickness and in Study, where they, while receiving a medical infusion, showcase some theoretical text that they're deeply immersed in, which is their way of presenting themselves, not as a passive patient, but as an activist.
Mm.
Um, and so when I saw their work on Instagram, I started to feel like this was something that I could do too, as a way to begin to connect.
And as you're going through the project and you're shooting over time, is it giving you relief to document it? So you're still using your craft as you're going through this illness? I mean, were you able to separate those two thoughts out?
Everything went really cleanly into compartments.
Mm.
I think at this point in time, when I was using my iPhone, it felt like I was working full time. Oh, here is a picture of Carolyn Lazard's In Sickness and in Study, one of the early shots of it. I was working full time, 9 to 5, and didn't have much time to make photographs outside of that structure. And so I really saw these monthly infusions as my predetermined time to make pictures.
Mm.
And so it became for me this sort of clockwork where I did everything I had to do all month, and then I would go into the hospital not only to receive this medication that would keep me able to participate in the world in the way that I'm used to, but that would also be the time that I would make my pictures. This photograph was made after my infusion by my husband when we were on the train. And after he made these pictures, it really sort of made me aware of something that then got put away in a in my pocket for later. Because in 2019, I had a child, and I have all of these titles because like I don't really know what I'm calling this yet. Our
Mm.
body is a clock, water for birds, not mosquitoes, goodbye High Street, and the passing measures. I throw all these titles around and I call this work all different things.
Mm.
So I had a child in 2019, and during that period, I stopped receiving my medication, and it was kind of like I was in a fantasy world where I would never have to be medicated again. And then when my daughter was 3 months old, I lost feeling and strength in my right hand. And then a few hours later, it inched up my arm and then all the way up. And I was having a flare, and I had to have sort of an emergency dose of medication administered at my home. And as it was happening, I knew I'd have to have this IV in for, they said, 10 days. And I was thinking, how am I going to take care of this infant and do all of this? And I set my camera up on the tripod, which I hadn't done. I put it on there horizontally, which I hadn't done. And I just made about 300 pictures. And things just clicked from when my spouse had made those pictures of me on the train to photographing myself and my daughter, where I just became more interested in creating these views of myself so that I could be the one authoring the the experience maybe, but also so that I could see what it looked like in these moments. So over the course of
Mm.
this 10-day steroid that I had at home, I continued to make these pictures. And then when I went back into the hospital to start to receive my infusions there, I began to bring my camera and my tripod with me, which is a habit that I continued and continue to do to this day. I think before I was trying to be very discreet and using the smallest tool, my phone, so that no one would see me or pay attention. And then I just realized that that concern was no longer real for me. And using the large camera started in the fall of 2019, and my monthly infusions continued until the summer of 2023. And now they're every 6 months rather than every month.
Okay.
During that time, I was photographing my daughter and me, as well as my daughter, my mother, and me, as a way to practice in these self-portrait views, because I was just learning techniques to make self-portraiture with this digital tool. And it seemed that really the pictures made outside of the hospital were helping to inform the pictures made in the hospital, because the size of the infusion suite is quite small.
Mm.
It's similar to the size of a doctor's office. I was also
Yeah.
making these portraits at the pediatrician's office.
And when you would go back and see these images, what did that do for you?
That is a tricky question. Many of these are made on a digital camera, but I don't review them immediately, even though they're immediately available,
Mm,
because they and I really need that time. At this point of infusion pictures alone, there are about 13,000. And I say that they aren't all good.
yeah,
And by that, I mean some of them are underexposed. Uh,
that's a great shot. Wow.
um, but also, I'm working on a book. I'm working on compiling funding for the book of infusion pictures, but I also have so many photographs to move through. Uh, it is a process. Many edits, many uh revisions. Yeah, I think I kind of dodged your question.
Yeah, you did. And that's fine.
Okay.
And where are we and where are we now with your dad?
My dad passed away in the fall.
That's I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank
I didn't know that. I apologize.
No, that's okay. He was a force, and uh yeah. There he is in the back. He's
Yeah,
the one uh releasing the shutter
yeah.
on on the remote. Um
And was your dad inspirational to you? Like, fight kid, fight, that kind of thing? Like, how was that relationship?
Not so much fight kid fight, but I've been talking about him a lot lately in terms of um I think he was kind of embarrassed when I started making these pictures. And he would feel embarrassed when I showed them to him, like just showing him a print or something. Um, and then I had the opportunity to author an op-ed in the New York Times in 2023.
Oh,
And his first question to me was, how did you do that? Like, how did you get that opportunity? So I explained it to him, and I said he received a print copy of the Times at home, and I said that I had gone out to try and get myself a printed copy of the paper, but that you could no longer get one at the bagel shop in town.
mm,
And we didn't talk about it anymore. And my husband was like, "Oh, that's really strange. I thought your parents would be really excited to talk about this with you." I said, "I don't know. I think my dad's a little embarrassed. I think now if he hadn't talked to people about it in his world, it's just out there." And he called me a couple hours later and said that he'd purchased 25 copies of the paper for me. So
wow.
I think um
That's great.
I think that he just always accepted me for who I am. And so to have that in your life, it really gives a person strength to do something like this.
Mhm.
And to me, that is the sort of fight kid fight that you were just saying, Frank.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I don't know that every parent can give that to their kid.
No, they can't, man. And where are you now with the disease?
I have been in remission for 2 years.
Great.
After my op-ed in the Times came out, I switched medications, and I'm now on one that I receive every 6 months. That has been great. And yeah, it's ongoing. The pictures that I make in the hospital, I intend to continue to make them indefinitely. So to call it a project is a funny thing because it's easy to say this is a project, but it is also my life. And I wanted to share this video because there was a period where I started, oops, where I started filming these videos of making the pictures. Because my husband said that it looked like a dance that was being done with the camera. And this one, I just muted it because I don't really want to share the audio, but there's a conversation between the nurse and me where this was made in February, and we're talking about how the year has already gone to shit and maybe next year will be better. But this is how typically I begin working. I just set up the tripod like this. And this scene is probably like somewhere in the 40s of the number of times that I've been in this room and have been setting up my camera, but I'll usually stand behind the camera and set up the scene very carefully and then sit down. In this film, I do it really fast, like I put the camera down and then I sit. And then I just leave the camera on throughout the whole visit. Now in my appointments, they had been 1 hour long, but in the new medication, they are 8 hours long. So I don't just leave the camera on all 8 hours. I usually take a nap in the middle
Right.
and then reassess where I'm at.
Well,
And this is where we're both laughing about it being better next year.
okay. At some point, we'll hear the audio on that.
At some point.
Yeah.
There's a few more and then I'll be done.
Okay, that's great.
Sorry to interject for a second, Frank, but there was something Sarah talked to me about in an interview that I really thought was interesting about um, so many of her images in her exhibitions that she focuses on the hospital because she feels so often people want to escape that, like meaning like outsiders, people observing art. They don't, it's too difficult to look at, or they don't want to
Oh,
look.
at a hospital. Okay.
Yeah, like these kinds of shots of like the ones that are not outside of the hospital. And I thought it was just really interesting and brave that she's like in the exhibitions that are these public environments, she's sharing so many photos that are difficult to look at because often people do want to turn away from
Mhm.
kind of hospital shots. And I think that was really interesting that Sarah actually leaned into that rather than backed away from it.
Mm. Yeah, and so many of the doctors' offices, Sarah, really were interesting. With the different things on the wall, they didn't look like the classic doctors' offices. Mm. And do you use interval shooting?
No, I use my remote. I've tried
Okay.
interval shooting, but it feels a little bit too out of my control.
Okay. Mm. Yeah, I mean like that's a nice office, of offices as offices. And what's your daughter's name?
Anita.
Anika. And how do you stay in shape yourself? Sandy wants to know your
That's
your exercising routine.
um I try to do some weightlifting and light weightlifting, and I try to swim,
Mm.
and I bike a little bit,
Okay, great.
walking.
So that's great. 2 years in remission, boy. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
That's really wonderful. And all these hospitals and visits are all upstate New York.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is the last one.
Here's a question. Why do you choose to make eye contact with the camera?
I think when I'm making the pictures, not every frame, like here is an example of not making eye contact at the moment that this question has been asked. But I think about the camera as looking in a mirror. And so part of my curiosity when I'm the one in front of the camera making the pictures is I want to see what it looks like living in that scene.
Mm.
And so I look at the lens because I'm like, I want to be looking at myself when I look at it later, so that I can feel like I'm addressing myself.
There you go. Very, very wonderful. Powerful work. Really powerful. And great, great, yeah, like, well, both of you, just beautiful storytelling. That's a hard thing to do. So, are you going to be able to stick around, Sarah?
Yeah, I'm gonna stay.
Okay, great. Okay, so we'll just move along. And, normally we would spend so much more time. It's just the way we're set up for this evening. So, let's get to Torrance York. It is now your turn to show us your work. Great presentation, Sarah. Great. Really.
Thank
Okay, so you stop sharing. All right, and we've just put Torrance's website address in the chat room. Anyone who's looking. And let's get her to share her screen. Where is she? Okay, there you go. You're muted, Torrance.
Okay, so I am sharing.
Yes, now you are.
Oh, awesome. Good. As I mentioned, one screen is barely working, so I'm a little handicapped here, but I'm so excited to be here. I have followed Sarah's work, for example, for such a long time on Instagram, and I have followed Alicia since learning about her through Jordan and Anna's project. Now I'm going to get nervous. Patient Caregiver Artist Coalition. It's really been exciting to meet kindred spirits and to have the opportunity to have my work seen, but also for me to see my work in the context of their environment. It's really, really exciting. So, and thank you, Frank, for giving us this opportunity to share with a broader audience. So I want to share today my project Semaphore, which I published this book in the fall of
So
2020.
wait, Torrance, we don't see anything yet on the screen. All we see is your desktop manager.
Oh, well, that's embarrassing. Why didn't you tell me that?
Well, easy, don't yell at me. Everyone's always yelling.
See here. I will just go to Acrobat then and not desktop too.
Okay, let's see.
That work?
Now we've got it. Okay, great.
Thank you. All right. So this is my book, Semaphore, the front and back cover, and I published it in 2022. And in photography in general, my motivation has always been to connect. So perhaps connecting with a memory or connecting with a landscape, a place, or a person in a portrait. But with this project, the idea of connecting has felt really different. It feels more like meditating with a mantra. So the image becomes something that takes this experience or concern out of me and puts it in a place where I can see what it looks like, but also I can share it with other people. So the content of the project is my experience having Parkinson's disease and the shift in my perspective once I had that diagnosis. Parkinson's is a neurodegenerative movement disorder, and it is the fastest growing brain disorder, but there are more people with Alzheimer's, but unfortunately there are 10 million people worldwide living with Parkinson's. So I was diagnosed in 2015, so that's 10 years. And the physiological problem in the brain of people with Parkinson's is that your dopamine making cells are dying off. So this is a moment where I was playing with the formula of dopamine. I found that sort of my springboard question was, what does it look like to accept this diagnosis? What does it feel like and look like for me to thrive with this illness? And I thought if I could visualize it, then maybe I could do a better job of living it.
And Torrance, did you immediately, once you got the diagnosis, say to yourself, I want to document this, my
No,
journey?
it's so funny. I was taking this wonderful workshop with Sandy Haber-Fifield. She was teaching it on sort of a 9-month basis for about 20 years, and I took the workshop for a couple of years. And at one point I said to her, I just want to tell you that I have Parkinson's. It doesn't have anything to do with my work, but it might explain why I don't, finish things because I have to have other priorities of taking care of myself. So I think she planted that seed and in her mind, because she gave us an assignment the next fall. We would usually have a couple assignments in the fall and then just be working on projects all along. And so this project is actually the thing that sparked this. Her assignment sparked this project, but I'm going to get to that in a minute. First, I want to say that what I found, I would shoot like what I was attracted to and what felt meaningful to me as I moved through the world with this new perspective. And there were certain themes that I discovered I was shooting along. So the body is one. All the pictures are square. Then nature. Everyday items and moments in, vernacular life. That's the canopy bed canopy. And then I played with some toys. I put this gem on the keyboard, the I key of the keyboard. And to me, it represents how solipsistic it is sometimes when you have an illness and you just can't forget about it, because every time you move, you remember you move differently now. And Cuisenaire rods, I don't know if any of you know about those, but in kindergarten, it was a way to learn math, and they're integers of 10 cubes and all these different colors. And so I played with that. And then light, another category or theme. In the book, Becky Senf wrote an essay for me called Torrance York's Fabric of Light, which I was just so thrilled that she came up with that title, because I want this project to be more about hope than despair. Then I combine those themes, those images, with medical images of mine from different periods. This is the MRI that showed I didn't have a brain tumor, and therefore the diagnosis of Parkinson's was accurate, or presumed accurate. But it's just one way that I could look at the x-ray. It's not actually showing neurotransmitters in there or anything. Oops, I just skipped one. That was one more x-ray. Then I have in the book 6 phrases. Is it my DNA is one. Can I be this adaptive? I think of these phrases just like another way of expressing an idea. Balance itself is a goal. And then the other ones are, I turn towards the sun. I never felt asymmetrical before, and there are no days off. So the images are sourced with my experience with Parkinson's, but I feel that they can speak more broadly to how people feel when they're facing a range of life changes or challenges. And so here's where this is part of my solution to one of Sandy's assignments, which was we contributed adjectives to describe ourselves, 2 of them. Then she gave each person in the workshop someone else's adjectives. And the ones I was supposed to photograph were nurturing and optimistic. So I was playing around with this tube of paper and this light, and this is a variation on my light at the end of the tunnel idea. But I think of this more as a yin yang thing, and you know, you can decide how you want to look at it, light or dark. But once I started thinking, well, of course I could photograph metaphors. Why not? Why not just like literally focus on that? It was just like this outflow of ideas and experiences that I felt needed documenting. And it was really an inflow in a way, because what I would see, what I'd stumble upon would somehow have a new meaning to me. And here's an example where I actually took, most of the pictures in the book are from 2019 to 2022. But while they're cherry blossoms every year and I shoot them every year, this comes from 2013 because it so well represents to me the way I was looking at cherry blossoms that year after being diagnosed, was that it looks like a nerve cell and it's dendrites. And, you know, exhibit. And coming across this wasp's nest, when I pulled out a longer lens that I had to go home to get, I saw that it looked like this monstrous face with this gash of a mouth and one eye right up here. So that to me represented fear. My husband came across this when he was trying to clear some things, and I said, wait, don't cut it down. I need to learn adaptation from this root or branch thing that was growing literally through the fence, and at the point of inflammation, you know, had bulged. Then the coyotes gave us this gift one morning. And I thought, you know, we all come to an end. I got really excited about this. When I was walking to the doctor's office, making my mental list of, okay, don't forget to ask this, this, and this. You see your movement disorder specialist like 2, 3, maybe 4 times a year, but it's always hard to get in. And so I thought, you know what's happening to me right now? I'm walking there and I feel like I'm walking asymmetrically. That's so strange. Like, it turns out I have a bit of a drop foot. It's one of my symptoms. So I thought, okay, that's really useful. Let me tell her that. And so that helped my communication with the doctor. That felt kind of like really important. And then I went home and I ordered these bone-like tangrams. So that's another toy I loved to play with as a kid, like a math toy. And I made this composition, and it's, you know, almost symmetrical, but it is asymmetrical. And I liked it. So it's one of 67 pictures in the book. And then I was showing it to my Parkinson's group one day, and someone said, well, you know, that's a picture of an angel, right? And I thought, no, I didn't intend that. I had no idea that was a picture of an angel, but I'm happy for it to be. It's another gift that the project was giving me.
Yeah, so Torrance, as you're going through all these images and you're putting all these things together, what, you know, how is it helping you in the creative process and as it relates to your illness?
Well, it was remarkable because I felt like I got a lot of satisfaction out of taking these experiences and getting them out of me and getting them to a place where I could share them and I could look at them and learn from them. So that was like, you know, a literal way, but it also was extremely rewarding to feel like people were interested in the images, which, you know, was happening in my workshop anyway. And I felt like the work was becoming a really strong project. And so I just was so happy that I was making, you know, lemonade out of lemons. I was like, this is the craziest silver lining, you know, because I believe in the work so much because I know my experience best and I'm the one representing it. So people can dislike it, sure, but I'm the one who can decide whether it's somewhat accurate to my experience.
So you're exploding creatively as you're going through this illness.
Yes, yes, that is exactly what's happened. So I say, like, my life was changed by getting Parkinson's. Then I made work about how my life was changed, and that changed my life again. And then meeting Jordan and Anna changed my life again.
Wow.
So these are some of the symptoms of Parkinson's. It's a very variable disease. People Some people have no tremor. Some people have tremors in several parts of their body. So these are some common things. The tremor, rigidity and stiffness, slowness of movement. That was one of my big ones. Difficulty with fine motor and dexterity, difficulty with balance and walking, loss of postural reflexes, and then non-motor symptoms of anxiety or depression. So I was also learning about brain health. I was learning about Parkinson's, but trying to learn whatever I could, working with a Dr. Sara Winston, who has a business called Mindful Neurology, and she had solved her own migraines back in college through yoga. And she has like traditional schooling to be a neurologist, but she also has alternative approaches. So I was excited to learn some of these things that could be useful to me. And again, they're not unique to Parkinson's. They're more about wellness and brain health, but reducing stress and calming your body, relaxing your body, which is hard when stiffness and rigidity is one of your symptoms. So here's my bubble bath, which I adore, taking bubble baths. And then this is actually a tabletop toy of a little sandbox. So that's kind of a Zen practice. My nest is, to me, it was one of my nurturing responses. So in that assignment I did for Sandy, I actually had this nest in a closet for about 20 years. And I finally was like, I know why I have this nest in the closet. I know where it came from. That's how long ago I have, I got it.
So the class with Sandy really turned out to be a blessing in
Yeah,
so many ways.
in so many ways. Yeah. So this is a picture of light. To me, optimism is so important. Lots of studies show that if you're optimistic about your progress and your prognosis and your attitude about life in general, things go better physiologically. And neuroplasticity is something that a lot of people now know. We used to think that your brain just sort of was born strong and had to be educated, but then it just, would degrade over time. But actually, your brain does change and grow. And neuroplasticity is when you do something new that you create new pathways in the brain. So to picture neuroplasticity, I did the kindergarten experiment with the bean in the glass with cotton balls and water, and I sprouted this lima bean. And then I put it in my singing bowl, and the form that it took, to me, it looks like Sisyphus. It looks like a person holding a rock in a lunge from the side view. So now I call it my Sisyphus picture, which is also an experience of Parkinson's, that every day you wake up and you still have the problem. I do want to say that when I was making this work, I was not taking the main medication that I now take that has been so helpful. So I was experiencing, sort of increased symptoms over time. The one thing we can do to help ourselves with Parkinson's and to slow the progression is exercise, which is, wonderful, but kind of hard to get in every day. And I try to do. So I just wanted to highlight the word semaphore, because when I first came across it, I didn't know it. And it is a form of communication like Morse code, but with flags for ships to communicate in the 1900s from ship to ship and ship to shore. So it's a signaling language, basically. So I felt, I heard about it from when I was listening to the book, A Handmaid's Tale, and Margaret Atwood had said the bodies were hanging on the wall like a semaphore, because these are people who were trying to escape the community and that wasn't allowed. So the ominousness of that reminded me of that wasp nest that scared me, and the symbolism of fear and uncertainty and chaos. So anyway, semaphore became an important word to me, and I realized, okay, this is perfect, because my book and my images are my communication out, and then all these messages I'm getting from the world, like the branch growing through the fence, or you know, coming across the angel in my book, or even how Becky Senf became the person to write the essay for me. A lot of things were coming to me, and then semaphore again is signaling, and neurotransmitters are about signaling within the body and the breakdown of that signaling. And the epigraph in the book is by David Bales and Ted Orland from Art and Fear. Notice the objects you notice, or put another way, make objects that talk and then listen to them. So this again reinforces where how the work kind of functioned for me. And by the way, David Bales happens to have Parkinson's, which is how I was pointed to him and then revisited this book from 1994.
Wow.
So I don't know. I guess I probably should stop. But I guess the thing I want to just say is that as I was making this work and feeling so elated by expressing myself, I thought, this is helping me. You know, exercise is helping me, but this is helping me as much as meditation helps me, or more. And then I came across the book Your Brain on Art, and I realized that there are studies and there is evidence of how we are physiologically changed by our creativity. And I'm just going to quickly go through these so I can get to something else, which is the definition of neuro arts from that book. Sometimes I like to ask people what they take away from the images, this language that I've created, but we'll do that another time. Some of the pairings, the opportunity to have a conversation between two images is really fun.
Right.
This is Orion, and that's ending on a strong note.
Right.
That's a hunter. And here is the definition of neuro arts. It's a transdisciplinary study of how the arts and aesthetic experiences measurably change the body, brain, and behavior, and how this knowledge is translated into specific practices that advance health and well-being. So I just have to say, we all got to keep being creative. And thank you so much for letting me share.
I have to say that really comes through in your talk, that how helpful this is to be creative for you. You can feel that, you can see it. It's
Thank you.
you wear that like a badge. It's beautiful. No, you really do. If you're paying attention, it's right. It's right on. That's really terrific. So thank you for doing that. And with that, we move on to Anna and Jordan.
Hey, everybody.
Thank you so much, Torrance.
Thank you so much to everybody's presented. Thank you so much, everybody that's here. I know it's we're probably getting close to time, so we will try to.
We will be very fast.
We will push through this quicker for everyone. Let's see. Okay. Why don't you start?
So,
Are you guys everybody able to see that first of all?
Yep.
Yes.
We had notes, but we can't find them, so we might have to just improvise.
we improvise. We
Oh,
won't
wait,
even make
I
it
found it,
really.
yeah. Okay, cool.
So, this is a cover of our book. We are Anna and Jordan Rathkopf. We do photographing, and our stories are focused on health and community.
And really the book is a collaboration. The project's been collaboration. Anna was diagnosed 8 years ago with breast cancer. We both are professional photographers at the time and didn't really expect that, obviously. And so we both consented together to capture the experience together. And so half of the work is really things that Anna was taking, half of it's things that I was taking. And it's really about conversation together, because I think very often we see it from the perspective of the person who's the patient, or maybe of the caregiver more commonly. And for us, though, it became this conversation visually that actually opened up conversations we weren't having that were impacting our
Naturally.
marriage.
So, as Sarah mentioned I was very isolated when I was diagnosed. I was 37. I had 2-year-old son. I'm an immigrant, and it was very lonely. I felt that everything was out of control, and the only control that I was able to have was my own expression, was the expression of what I was going through. My most immediate fears was about Jesse, our son. He was 2.5 years old, and I was really scared that he won't remember me. So I was trying to make memories.
And for me, my mother was diagnosed when I was a child with cancer, and our family hadn't talked about it much, and I didn't realize how much that followed my whole life. So I think I saw a lot of myself in Jesse in a weird way. It was kind of like my inner child, seeing like Jesse, our son, experiencing a sick mother, made me understand really what impact having a sick mother had had on me in my life. I found a folder on a hard drive many years ago. It said 2016 to 2020, and it was filled of images of beautiful nature, but kind of moody like this, self-portraits of Anna, and photos she had been taking of me and Jesse, and she had never shared it with me. And when I saw these images, it was kind of like, what does this mean? What does that mean? And it just opened all these conversations that we realized we just weren't having. And what I didn't recognize really ironically until I saw her photos, especially things of nature like this, was how emotionally broken she felt in some ways.
When we were talking, Torrance, about art on brain. So for me, the most important thing was to take the image, to think about what I want to say, but it was not about sharing it at that time so much.
And then I mentioned it earlier when we were talking about Sarah's, but we've struggled ourselves with how much hospital we wanted to show, but it seems kind of disingenuous to not show hospital when you're dealing with major illnesses because you do spend quite a lot of time there. So our approach to the hospital was a little more abstract, a little more surreal, almost like a horror show or something or a sci-fi movie. It just to capture the feeling of the hospital, if not so much the particulars. And for us, that feeling felt very much so about dehumanization, really. It just felt like you're no longer the people you were once you're in that hospital. You're now like a wristband, a stat.
So, and while Jordan was photographing more me and the environment, I was focusing on the inner life. For me, the difference between what I was going through in the hospital, doctor's appointments, the fear, and then coming home and seeing Jesse's toys. It was just such a stark difference.
Mm.
And so it was just reminding me the motherhood that I was going through. That's weird expression. The motherhood that I had. And I was just not just a patient.
And how what was going through your child's mind? Did he grasp what was going on some level?
I think so, yeah.
We disagree on that.
But he disagrees. He has muscle memories. He doesn't have like he was 2.5, 3.5
Ah,
when
okay.
like a year, but he has a muscle memory. So every time I get sick, he goes to bed with me.
Mm.
The stuff that we were doing as when I was sick.
But it's good that you asked that, Frank, because we're in a different place now with the project, and I don't feel as comfortable sharing it
Yeah.
now, ironically, as I did.
With him.
Yeah.
Or yeah, or he recently had an exhibition in New York that was very public, and he did not respond well.
Ah,
And he's at a different age now, and he has a different understanding of things. And I'm realizing now that my feelings about sharing the story are also changing as he's getting older.
But this is his favorite image.
Yeah, this one
ah,
he likes. He likes ice cream, so he's cool with this photo.
Yeah.
mm, okay.
And I think that what was interesting to me, at least, was that I was so laser focused on Anna and Jesse when she was sick. I didn't really focus on myself at all, in terms of being in the story or anything like that. I do think that's interesting because I think that speaks a lot to the journey of a caregiver in general, where we often feel like we're not the important ones or that somehow the
Yeah.
person that we love, the pain that they're going through, is worse than what we are. And so we minimize ourselves. And so just having Anna capturing me and making me feel like I'm an important part of her story, I think that that's something that's important to draw out sometimes in stories too, is that people are very rarely go through things like this completely alone, although people do. And I asked her when she showed me this picture, how she knew I used to cry in the car, and she said she didn't. So, it's just these photos started opening up conversations that we were never having. And then one of the main reasons we share these projects is because it's painful and it's not fun all the time, is to try to stir up conversation. And one conversation I do think that needs to happen more is about men and vulnerability as it relates to illness. I think it's a really big problem. Hospitals I went to told me that divorces are very common when the woman gets sick. It's much more common if a woman gets sick for a relationship to split up than if it's the man who gets sick. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but one reason I think is that men turn angry when they can't control a situation. And when they can't express fear or things like that, that fear can easily turn into anger.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And this photo, again, just the difference between our experience. I took it thinking, wow, what a beautiful, strong, resilient person. And when I showed it to her a few years ago, she said, I never felt worse than I did on that day. I never felt more broken or less happy than that day. And so I
Yeah,
just think it's interesting.
I found it very interesting to see how Jordan saw me and how I actually saw myself. So
Right.
throughout my, I was doing a lot of self-portraits that we don't have time to go through, but for me, I felt broken and I felt shattered and I felt I was disappearing. And then when I went through Jordan's photos of me, I just saw his love for me, and it was um, eye-opening how you can perceive yourself while other people.
Mm. Perception and reality, right? Two different things.
And then we just try to integrate some humor if we can. I mean, it's not always easy. Some people do it better than others. There are some great stories about illness. I love, the
Yeah.
2-2 project, right? Where
Yeah. Bob Carey.
Yeah, Bob Carey and his wife who has cancer, he gets dressed in pink tutu and does these really. I think you can do humor. I'm not sure that we were feeling it, but we did integrate some of it because that's just a normal part of life.
And Jordan just really liked this wig.
I like having hair.
Oh my God.
Include that in the slideshow. This image definitely I don't feel comfortable sharing these days because of censorship and all the stuff that's going on around nudity with children and all that stuff. And this is basically we're wrapping it up because we knew that we were short on
Yeah.
time a bit. So
So this is when when I reached my fifth year with no evidence of disease. That's when they tell you that you're basically they're done with you. You don't
Mm.
see them anymore, and that's it. So for me, even though they saw it as a milestone, like I actually fell apart.
Yeah.
Yeah, did not feel like celebrating. I didn't know what to do with myself. I felt really lost and terrified. So I started to share the work, and that's when we started to think about book and putting the work together. It was a little bit delayed with my mom's disease and illness, but so we started to do it 7 years now.
so we're using the project to do things like this, launch nonprofits, bring community together. In our case, there's a lot of areas that I think need improvement in how cancer is talked about.
Mm.
It's very, in my opinion, overly simplified. It's either you beat it or you lose to it or you become a CEO and for us and most of the people we know, it's somewhere in the middle. We're dealing with ongoing physical problems that Ani has as a result of her treatment. We're dealing with emotional problems. Anna lost her fertility, and that was a really big emotional grief for us as a family. Um, and then really importantly, I think all the people presenting today could appreciate this is financial strain. I mean, being a freelancer in general is a really difficult situation to be in. Being a freelancer navigating illness is almost impossible. There's no paid time off. There's nothing like that. And no one's even talking about it. And I don't know why, because that's really what
Yeah.
keeps us and our friends up at night is how can we afford these things? How am I going to get my career back? How am I going to make a living? And so, I just wanted to point it all back to that because that's really, to us, an important part of why we're trying to use our work and also promote other work. And so we do it through trying to get placement of this in, newspapers and media at large. We try to place it in hospitals where doctors and students go and to help bedside manner. And then we're trying to place this kind of work into public space where it's accessible for all and where strangers passing by can maybe encounter something that will change their lives. Maybe it'll lead to them finding their own disease one day or paying more attention to their own health. And so that's kind of the quick of it.
Yeah.
Ending on the final slide here of the Patient Caregiver Artist Coalition. Again, anyone here that would like to be a part of this, who would like to share work or just has ideas for what we can be doing with the work, please reach out. www.pcac.ngo. We're on Instagram, and I think my email's in the chain here, but it's just my name, Jordan J. Rathkopf at gmail.com.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I think, a night like this is really sort of it's sort of humbling to see the journeys that everyone goes on and how you use your creativity as therapy, right? And bonding with each other and to for a common cause. It's really, really intense. Yeah, a night like this really is good for everybody. I think Sarah had to leave, I think. Right. And that's fine. Um, so Alicia, like how do you garnish the energy to be with your mom, right? And show her with dignity. I mean, like, what are the parameters that you put in your own mind?
As far as like making work or as far
Yeah,
as
as far
on
as
a
making
personal
work, exactly. Like, so I'm going to document her for the next 2 weeks. How does that happen?
uh I mean, I try to spend time with her without a camera also, just
Right.
to kind of connect with her then. And I mentally prepare myself by honestly living in another country.
Right.
Like I think here I can center myself and I mean, to be honest, like be depressed and feel my feelings and go to therapy and do all these things. So that way, when I am in Miami, I don't think compartmentalizing necessarily is like the healthiest, but I think if I'm doing it for a week or 2 weeks, I know that I'm going to be able to come back and feel what I need to feel. Um,
Mm.
and so, yeah, when I'm with her, I mean, I think that's how I prepare.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
try to like balance a lot of joy also when I'm back in Mexico City
Right.
and happiness when I'm back there.
And are your brothers the ones who are taking care of her day in and day out?
It was my father,
Right.
but she's in an assisted living as of a week ago.
Okay, so that's a new moment in time.
It's a new moment, and I just got back from Miami on Tuesday, so I'm very much
Still there.
processing
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, if anybody, I mean, not to plug my own Instagram, but if anybody wants to follow the journey along, I always post, like
Right.
I posted something on Instagram today, and part of that reason is because, I mean, I think same as everybody else is that this journey is so isolating, and thankfully, I have my community, I have my friends, but it's not the same. I
Right.
can't tell them all of the heart-wrenching details. And so I post things on Instagram because I feel really alone and I want people to feel like they're not alone and like they can connect with me and kind of see what's, the journey of all of this. So
Mm. And Torrance, how do you, like when you're going to your doctors,
Mhm.
um, like give us a sense of, is there anxiety? What, like, or do you know before you go, I'm doing okay, or I am like limping a little bit, or what,
Well,
how do you,
I guess one story that I think kind of reveals this is, as I mentioned, I wasn't taking the main medication for
right.
7 years. So when I would go, when it was sort of 4 years in and whatever, I would think, oh God, is she going to put me on that medication? And the reason that now the theory has changed because the medication doesn't work forever, they thought your body got used to it. But
Um,
now they realize that it's just you have less for it to work with in your brain as you do progress. But if taking it allows you to exercise more effectively, then you should take it earlier. So
mm,
I was sort of diagnosed in the early stage of this developing idea. And now, if
mm,
you get diagnosed, you might take that medication right away. But so
right,
I would go in and I would say, I'm afraid you're going to put me on, levodopa carbidopa.
right.
And she said, well, it doesn't have to be that. Actually, you could take this. So then I drove into the city that day, and I usually would take the train when I was going to the doctor, but I was having dinner with my mother. So anyway, as I was pulling out of my parking space, I got spooked by this cab that went by really fast. And so I ended up like kind of gunning out of my spot and got into there for an accident. The other car that I hit was the doorman's who was right there. I had to wait like 4 hours for the police to come. And I was like, I guess I'm really upset about this medication.
Okay.
So, yes, there's a lot of anxiety around that, but it has gotten a little easier now because it seems like there are less surprises, fewer
Right.
surprises.
So you're on the right road. And is this something that you have to monitor for the rest of your life? And how does that work?
Yes, for I don't take it in the middle of the night yet, but some of my friends do. And it's scary when you think about what's in your catastrophe bag. If I have to escape, I'm like, oh my God, I will only have so many days to be functional.
Ah, okay.
Um,
So a
and
catastrophe bag. Wow. Mm,
yeah,
mm.
like if there's a 9/11 again or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I get that. And Jordan, and Anna, I never thought of that aspect about, Jesse, evolving as the project, still has its life and how he, reacts to it. I mean, that sort of comes out of left field, right?
Mhm. It's
Yeah,
not
I
fun.
didn't really, I felt really crappy, to be honest with you, last weekend with the Photoville because I didn't
Right.
expect it.
Mhm.
You've seen the work so much, but there was something about seeing it in a public space.
It was
Mm,
big.
It was like 6 feet large. They
yeah,
were really large.
yeah, I was there. Yeah.
And it was just, I think it was just seeing people. I don't know what it was, but
How old is he?
he's 11.
11.
He's 11 now. Yeah.
He reacted not great. So that was a good experience because it's going to definitely change, I think, moving forward, how we approach the work.
Yeah. And what you
Especially
see
how
when
we
you
share it.
journey.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think also, Jordan, remembering to give him the camera.
Yeah. There you go.
I
Yeah.
mean, like you
Doesn't
said,
want
you chose to do in your book. Like I just think, he'll feel empowered to take pictures from his own perspective, and
Great idea.
maybe that will be meaningful.
We've had him do a little bit of that. But I think we're going to take a break for a little while. I mean, it's another reason I love the coalition. It was never, this was we never intended for this. Like, you know, with Anna getting sick, we didn't think the story would be so public. So I think we're going to probably focus on other stories for a little while.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I have to say, um, Alicia, the yours, because my mom had exactly the same dementia and Alzheimer's, and I mean exactly so many things. Just comes back, and I wonder, part of this coalition is it's sort of therapeutic for all of us to hear, you guys go through these stories and document them so that, we have a little bit of distance and you're able to see this and feel that, through your images and all of you have beautiful storytellers, which really, is engaging for the audience. It's really a gift. And if anyone else has any questions, raise your hand or put it in the chat room if you want. Um, could you and you should all look through your through the chat there. Everyone is really loving your presentations. It's it's sort of interesting to hear the caregiver, to the person who's caring for themselves, and the family that pulls together on all of this is there's so many layers. So how does the coalition move forward to help the pharmaceutical companies, the hospitals, to doing shows in those spaces is wonderful. What else are you guys thinking or planning on doing,
I mean,
or has that been flushed out yet?
I mean, we're working on educational programming, so meaning working specifically with universities of pharmacology on visual storytelling projects that will
Mm,
inform research on clinical
right.
trials before they're performed. But that, my background was in marketing PR, so I'm a kind of multi-pronged approach here. I think what needs to happen is if someone gets diagnosed with Parkinson's or is dealing with Alzheimer's or cancer or whatever our disease is, we need to see work that makes us feel more connected and makes us feel more hopeful, but also recognizes our pain. There's just not enough of that. And
Right.
so part of what I want to do is literally get pharmaceuticals hiring people with lived experience, hospitals hiring people with lived experience to just do better work that your average person, when Googling Parkinson's, might come across. On
Mm,
the more inside baseball side of things, though, there's this other element, which is working with hospitals, working with pharmaceutical companies who are actually developing the drugs or actually developing the treatments and helping educate them so they better understand the experience of patients and caregivers so that they can better serve them, not just profit off of their illness,
you
actually
know,
serve them.
I wonder if there's a space there where the hospitals can be the advocate to say, we have photographers who could document this journey for you. Would you be interested in it? Would you be interested in someone who's lived this to document it for your family? That's just something that comes to mind. If that's sort of interesting.
Well, that's why you're an advisor, Frank, because I know you have a lot of experience in these things and you can help that. But, my experience so far, if I'm being really honest, with hospitals, is they're one of the toughest to work with in some ways because they're all about winning, right? We beat cancer, we beat this disease, we're the best. We're all the language, all of the posture is about beating and winning and being the best. And the reason for that is because they need to make money. And they need to make money because of a broken system that we live in. And so this is my issue that I'm having a little bit with the nonprofit even right now is I started this because I want authenticity and diversity, and I literally can't even use the word diverse right now. Literally, like my Instagram got torn down, like deleted because I had a mission statement that included the word diverse. What I meant by diversity was the true meaning of the word. Like it could be anything, where you live, but they took it for the way that they want to interpret it, and they deleted my account.
Mm,
One of the hospitals, one of the pharmaceutical schools that I'm working with, just had their major grant funding canceled because they work with a predominantly Black and brown community, and they weren't afraid to say the word diverse. So we're navigating really difficult times right now,
mm,
and art is going to be the vehicle. Art is going to be, in my opinion, the tool that can connect people in ways that are actually quite difficult right now because of what we actually can't say and what we are supposed to not say. We're going to have to be subversive.
right. Yeah, any other, yeah, like I said, make sure you look in that chat room. Anyone else have any questions? Torrance, why don't you give us, one of your final statement for the evening?
Well, I guess I'd go back to the value of art making and how when you read about things like working with clay can produce oxytocin, which is the love hormone, or um, you know, a hug 30 seconds or longer can produce dopamine.
Right.
These are things we should do because they do make us feel better. And the art making thing, even doodling, lowers your cortisol. So if you don't have time to meditate, doodle when you're on the train or something. Um,
Right.
these I just think that we underestimate. When I was young, I thought art was like, what am I learning here?
Right.
Was like, I was a math science person, I wanted tangible things. But I grew to understand that you can't answer every question and life is bigger than that. And I particularly need to be amazed by that now as I go through these challenges. So art can be a helpful part of it, and let's not cut it out of the education and all of that.
Right. Okay. Alisa?
Mm, hmm. I think just saying that, I mean, everything that you're saying about art and fostering community, I think for me is really important. A big part of the reason why I also started doing this work and wanting to show it publicly. And I mean, honestly, my dream is to have a traveling exhibition. And a big part of this is because we don't talk about our mental health.
Mm.
We tend to, again, be really isolated. We're depressed at home and we don't want to talk to anybody. But I think the more we share, the more we foster community, I think the better off we are. I mean, it's not going to take away the difficulties of caregiving or this disease or any disease for that matter. But I think the more that we could share as a community, I think, yeah, I think the better off we are. So I'm hoping that through my work, I could
Yeah.
do more of
I
that.
mean, certainly this entity that you guys have put together starts in that direction, right? I
Mhm.
mean, it does, and it has to keep on pushing, and the shows and wherever you can go, and doing all that is yeah, is vitally important. And Jordan, we give you the final word. You only have 40 minutes to finish.
I'm just thank you to everyone who came here, who's obviously feels some kind of connection to these issues. Thank you to all the artists. You know how much I admire you and what you're,
Great job.
and
Really
then
great
and
job.
then to you, Frank. I mean, you're unbelievable. I don't know how many of these you've done, but like you're so generous with your time and with your network. And thank you for being a part of this, believing in it. Um,
Mm.
and I'm just excited for what we can build together. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah. There's also, and I should have mentioned it early, Nancy Borowick did a great book on exactly this topic as well. Very, very beautiful.
She's coming up next, Frank. We got an interview with her, and
Oh, she is. Okay.
she's part of the coalition. So
Yeah.
we're
She, she's a good person. So I thank everyone. And we again, this will be up on YouTube probably next week sometime, Monday or Tuesday, because this is a rare Thursday night projections. So you'll see it next week, and when you go there, subscribe. And we do have a projections next week with Madeline Kelly, a photojournalist who's doing work in Burma. So very powerful work coming there, and other things down the pike. But I thank everyone for being here, and for Anna and Jordan for organizing it, and our presenters. You guys did a great job. You
Fabulous.
moved all of our hearts. So that's the job. So thank you everyone, and we'll see you next time.